The cover page of One Piece chapter 1097 titled Ginny is actually directly related to the chapter this time. We've got a teenage Kuma catching salmon with the power of his devil fruit while Ginny and their friends from town cheer him on. We return to the Sorbet Kingdom 30 years ago, which is 8 years after the two managed to escape from God Valley. An old person was begging Kumachi for help. Seems like Ginny's nickname for him has really caught on. The elder told him that they'd always come to the church when his father was around, so they were really surprised when the whole family suddenly vanished. Seeing that they raised such a wonderful son who became a pastor, they were sure his parents must be proud. At this point, Kuma was 17 years old and had one hell of a growth spurt, one that even included bare ears on the top of his head, more likely from his devil fruit. The Sorbet Kingdom's population was mostly made up of old people, and therefore, most of them were poor due to an inability to work. Kuma relieved the pain of an old lady with the power of his fruit, while a line of plenty others eagerly awaited their turns. They were all incredibly grateful to Kuma for relieving their pain and praised his divine hands. One of them even asked if the pastor could do this on weekdays too. But a loud stomp interrupted them as a woman declared that he absolutely cannot. This was a Sunday exclusive. She scolded the old-timers for shamelessly expecting treatment without paying even a single berry. Despite her attitude, they all laughed at the appearance of Ginny the Stingy. To this, she shouted at the drinking picnickers that this wasn't a nursing home. The old folks had to admit that the girl was beautiful, but had quite a foul mouth. But even that wasn't enough to dissuade the men from all over town from confessing to her. Now fully revealed to us, a frustrated 21-year-old Ginny told them not to change the subject. And oh lord, Oda's got the Holy Sisters dressed like this in a church? This man is just inviting sin at this point. I'm not gonna dwell on this too much out of respect for my boy Kuma, but god damn! But with Kumachi around, no man stood a chance. They'd also say that just seeing his face was enough to soothe their hearts. Kuma was really glad to see them and hear their kind words. Ginny quickly turned and reprimanded Kuma for pampering them too much. And I can't lie, just thinking about these guys seeing the pacifista all over the news is a heartbreaking thought. Now, you might be thinking that because this was 30 years ago, they're probably all dead. But Oda has confirmed to us that your typical human can live to be at least 141 years old in this world. After that, an old lady mentioned how they'd all love to donate and support the big fella, but lately it's been a real struggle to meet the heavenly tribute. Apparently, they had a new king with a pretty nasty reputation. This new king, Bakori, was infamously known as a cold-blooded monster. He demanded that ailing people like them pay the heavenly tribute without exception. One geezer chimed in that if they don't, they'll be thrown in prison. This guy was the absolute worst. An old lady spoke about how an old friend of hers was locked away and ended up dying of starvation. The awful king refused to even give prisoners a meal. He was even more stingy with funds than Ginny. He was a terrible man who would happily bend over for the celestial dragons any day of the week. If they couldn't manage to stay in good health, it would only be a matter of time before they all wind up dead. Clearly, this is the guy the world government tried to convince people that Kuma was like. Shifting the mood, Kuma told them all that he would be sure to take away any pain or sickness they experience. So he urged them to come by every week. With a big smile and a wave, he saw them off. It was nightfall by then, and Kuma faced a massive concentration of all that he had removed from them. After taking a deep breath, he plunged his hands into it and was immediately assaulted by the harmful collection. Despite being able to tank a direct hit from Saint Saturn as a little kid without so much as a tear, this thing made Kuma cry out in horrible pain. Ginny was barely holding herself together as she listened to his cries. But eventually, it was over. Ginny held back tears as she went to help him. Once he was in bed, she spoke of how he keeps doing this to himself week after week. None of the elderly visitors knew about the pain he endures for them. Smiling at her, Kuma accepted that it couldn't be helped. Someone needed to accept the mass extraction of pain and suffering to make it go away. If he just let it be, it would end up returning to the original sources, which definitely makes Zoro taking on Luffy's pain even cooler. But Kuma didn't mind. He was happy as long as everyone else could be happy. But he was sorry for worrying her. He planned on getting stronger so he'd be able to better handle it. But Ginny argued that that was hardly the issue. Shifting gears, Kuma suggested that they have dinner to cheer her up. Much to Ginny's excitement, this girl sure does love food. And despite the pain, they were happy together. After that, we fast forward 5 years. By now, Kuma is 22 and Ginny is 26. The church was in an uproar as Ginny happily insisted that the two of them get married. But Kuma hesitantly told her that they couldn't. That sort of reaction really pissed her off since she didn't see any reason not to. She knew all too well that he loves her and told him to just admit it already. Angrily, she asked if it wouldn't make him happy. Blushing, Kuma admitted that he's sure it would, but it was complicated. Internally, his reasoning was simple. He remembered how he and his parents had been enslaved because he was born with buccaneer blood. His mother was a normal human, yet she too was made to suffer. That was the last thing he wanted for Ginny. He didn't want to make her unhappy. Any child of theirs would be in serious danger, which only furthers the concept that Bonnie isn't actually Kuma's biological daughter. But Kuma, clearly a master of changing the subject by now, flipped through the paper. He mentioned how there were finally a few wanted posters for the freedom fighters that have been causing a ton of riots all over the world. And their leader's name was Dragon. Seems like they conveniently left out the whole Monkey D part. Connecting him to the hero of the Marines and the mysterious D initial would only make matters worse. Inspired, Kuma spoke of how cool and heroic the guy was. He was certain that one day, he too would make it out to sea and spend the rest of his life helping people. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Kuma answered it and was faced by two men that had come to simp over Ginny. They even caught a ton of fish to give to her. Kuma had no issue with them fawning over his woman and happily accepted, which earned him a wooden container thrown in his head by Ginny. Ginny just had to take a deep breath on account of Kuma being so foolish. 3 years later, a 25-year-old Kuma was caught up in a huge incident. Now sporting his signature hat, he angrily demanded that a group of men give back all the people they had kidnapped. The old people begged Kumachi to save them. The soldiers mocked the man and asked if he really wanted to go against the royal army. A number of onlookers recognized Kuma as a pastor from the south. With an old man in his clutches, a scar-faced goon asked the pastor if he'd missed the new law. They were now free to use every person from the south however they wanted. Realizing that they planned to enslave them, Kuma's fury only grew. Using his devil fruit powers, he refused to forgive them and was now branded a traitor. Elsewhere, one of King Bakori's men urged the ruler to reconsider such a rough policy that the populace would hardly accept. But the long-nosed sovereign insisted that there was nothing to worry about. People have a tough time embracing change, but soon enough, they'd all begin to look down on the southern people just like he does. From this day forward, he declared that the people of the north would be the true Sorbet Kingdom. He only saw value in those who could adequately pay the heavenly tribute to the world government. After all, the amount necessary was determined by a country's population. Because of this, the elderly from the south were nothing but an eyesore. But cutting them off and turning the south into a lawless area, the true Sorbet Kingdom would only flourish. Eventually, Kuma and the others were all locked away in prison. Turning to them with his bruised face, Kuma asked why all his friends got arrested too. Ginny let him know that they had caused a bit of trouble too and demanded Kuma's release. But they just ended up with a beating and the same fate. Gritting his teeth in anger, Kuma told Ginny that his homeland was on the verge of becoming a discriminatory kingdom. She responded that the king is just a puppet of the celestial dragons, and that he got this policy from them. Because of that, if they defied this country, they would also need the resolve to fight the world government. Meanwhile, several large explosions rang out. The king was urged to quickly escape, but utterly disgusted, two figures refused to let a celestial dragon's lapdog like him get away. The people rejoiced after the tyrant king had been dethroned and the slave policy had been abolished. Thanks to the intervention of a certain group, the Sorbet Kingdom was saved from its evil leader. Now entering the prison, the leader of the revolt praised the man his comrade recommended for causing such a stir. The big-headed one insisted that Dragon would really like him. Once inside, he called out to Kuma and Ginny, knowing that they had both been arrested and telling the two that they had come to save them. They were both shocked to see Eva again. In response, Eva told Kuma that if he hasn't changed, they should change the world together. And just like that, Kuma and Ginny joined the Freedom Fighters. Established right after the Great Dawn of Piracy, they caused a ton of angry revolts all over the world. After the tragedy of Ohara's destruction, they were more determined than ever to make a difference. Dragon, Eva, and Kuma became its three great pillars. Eventually, the group became known far and wide as a revolutionary army. And if you notice, on Dragon's leg is a band with imagery almost identical to what would later become the markings on his face. But despite their growing movement, they still lacked funding. So they needed to operate like mercenaries. They would lend a helping hand to various rebellions in order to overthrow tyrannical kings, fanning the flames of revolution all the while. They would teach anyone who wished to join their ranks how to wield weapons and fight. Dragon intended for them to become a boundless army spread throughout the entire world. While sailing on a ship with their old insignia, Kuma asked Dragon where he learned so much about weaponry. The commander-in-chief admitted that he used to be a marine, but ultimately, he didn't find even a shred of justice among them. For Dragon to have so quickly overthrown a force that even managed to capture someone as super strong and durable as Kuma, who also has a top-tier devil fruit, is damn impressive. Kuma was taking crazy damage on a weekly basis, which could have only empowered his already ridiculous pain tolerance. So Monkey D. Dragon is no doubt a total monster. There is no question in my mind that this guy is at least Admiral level. Eva laughed as they all enjoyed a meal and some drinks together. From Marine to Revolutionary, all Dragon wanted to do was help people. With this, Kuma vowed to follow Dragon to the very end, something that his friend was sure he wouldn't end up regretting. Eventually, Kuma returned to his church in the Sorbet Kingdom. The old folks were still kicking, and the big guy told them that he'd be coming home every now and again since he tends to worry about them. And with that, 8 years would pass by with a similar tone. But 14 years ago, in a certain kingdom, a fellow revolutionary couldn't help but notice how excited Ginny seemed to be as she stung to herself with a gun in hand. Now the commander of the Eastern Army, with some food in her mouth, Ginny figured the reason should be pretty obvious. Happily blushing, she mentioned how they'd be meeting up with Kumachi's squad soon. She was so joyful that she could hardly breathe. They recognized that Commander Kuma truly was a lucky man, one that had won the heart of the woman they all admire. But the idea of them all admiring her totally grossed Ginny out, much to their pain. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure began approaching them. Sometime later, Dragon received an urgent call while he was at the main headquarters of the Revolutionary Army, Baltigo. With a grim look on his face, along with now having his signature marking, Dragon received the news that Ginny had been captured. The men who reported it profusely apologized, as it was on account of a truly unexpected enemy. So we now have a rough time frame of when Dragon received his marks. And if this all went down 14 years ago, then this was before Luffy ended up with Shanks' Straw Hat and met his brothers Sabo and Ace. It probably also means that Bonnie is less than 14 years old. So that whole her being a kid thing holds up. But oh man, I am not ready for the next chapter at all. Hopefully you guys are enjoying these flashbacks. I have always liked Kuma, especially because of his devil fruit. But after getting to know him more, I can definitely say that he has risen even higher up on my list of top 10 favorite characters. Let me know how you're all feeling in the comments, along with who you think pulled up on Ginny. Right now, I'm thinking it might be the Holy Knights, but we'll see. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.